In 1748, France made it illegal to grow potatoes. The punishment? Prison. The crime? Cultivating a vegetable that the French government believed caused leprosy. Today, the average French person eats over 60 pounds of potatoes every year. What happened between then and now is one of history's most bizarre food transformations, and it involved armed guards, midnight heists, and a pharmacist who wouldn't take no for an answer. Here's the puzzle that stumped Europe for 200 years. The Spanish conquistadors brought potatoes back from South America in the 1500s. They also brought back gold, chocolate, and tobacco. The Europeans went crazy for all of those things. But the potato, they called it devil's apples. They fed it to prisoners and pigs. Some cities banned it entirely. But here's what doesn't make sense. In Peru, potatoes had sustained entire civilizations for 8,000 years. The Inca Empire fed 12 million people with potatoes. They built cities in the clouds because of this crop. So why did Europeans think it was poison? And how did a food that was banned by law become the foundation of modern European cuisine? The answer involves war, famine, and one of the strangest stories in food history. Let's rewind to 10,000 years ago. High in the Andes Mountains. Altitude, 3,800 meters above sea level. The air is thin. The ground is rocky. Temperatures swing wildly between day and night. Most crops can't survive here. But wild potato plants? They thrived. Indigenous communities around Lake Titicaca noticed these plants. They began experimenting, domesticating the wild potatoes, learning their secrets, and what they discovered changed everything. The Incas figured out something remarkable. They could dehydrate potatoes into a substance called chuño. The process was ingenious. They would spread potatoes on the ground during freezing nights. The potatoes would freeze solid. During the day, they would walk over them, pressing out the moisture with their bare feet. Night after night, until the potatoes were completely dried. This preserved potato could last 10 to 15 years. In a region where harsh winters could destroy fresh crops, chuño was literally the difference between life and death. They boiled potatoes, mashed them, roasted them, fermented them in water. But potatoes weren't just food to the Incas. They used them to treat injuries, predict the weather, even make childbirth easier. Here's the strangest part. The Incas used potatoes to measure time. Their time units corresponded to how long it took to cook a potato to different consistencies. Their entire concept of time was based on this vegetable. By the 1500s, the Inca Empire was thriving. 12 million people spread across modern-day Peru, Ecuador, Bolivia, Chile, and Argentina. Massive cities built on mountainsides, armies marching across continents, all powered by the humble potato. Then the Spanish arrived. The conquistadors were looking for gold. They found it, but they also found something that would eventually prove more valuable than all the gold in the Americas. They just didn't know it yet. Spanish ships carried potatoes back to Europe around 1570. Europeans embraced chocolate immediately. Tobacco became wildly popular. But potatoes? Europeans looked at them with suspicion and fear. Here's why their fear made sense. Potatoes belong to the nightshade family, the same family as deadly nightshade, a plant that can kill you within hours. Europeans saw the resemblance and panicked. They believed potatoes were created by witches or devils. Religious leaders claimed anything that grew underground was sinful. The potato's appearance didn't help. It had speckled skin, odd shapes, knobbly protrusions. Europeans thought it looked diseased. Rumors spread that eating potatoes caused leprosy. France banned potato cultivation in 1748. The law stayed in effect until 1772. The Parliament of Paris declared potatoes unfit for human consumption. Other countries followed suit. For 2 centuries, Europe starved while a solution literally sat in their gardens. Now here's where it gets interesting. 1757. The 7 Years' War is raging across Europe. A young French pharmacist named Antoine Parmentier is serving in the medical corps. He's captured by Prussian forces and thrown in prison. And here's what changed history. The Prussians fed their prisoners nothing but potatoes, just potatoes, day after day, week after week. Parmentier expected to get sick, maybe even die. Everyone in France knew potatoes were poisonous, but something strange happened. He didn't get sick. In fact, he felt fine, better than fine. His mind was clear. He began studying the potatoes, examining them, taking notes. While Parmentier was discovering this in prison, something else was happening in Prussia. King Frederick the Great had figured out the potato's potential decades earlier. During the War of the Austrian Succession in 1740, Prussia faced a food crisis. Frederick needed a crop that could feed his people even during wartime. He learned about potatoes and ordered peasants to grow them, but the peasants refused. They thought potatoes looked weird. Frederick tried everything. He ordered them to plant potatoes under threat of punishment. He gave them free cuttings. Nothing worked. Then, Frederick had a brilliant idea. He planted potatoes in his royal fields and posted armed soldiers to guard them, day and night. Heavily armed guards protecting vegetables. But here's the twist. Frederick secretly told the guards to be deliberately lazy. Take long breaks. Accept bribes. If they saw someone stealing potatoes, chase them, but never actually catch them. The peasants saw the guards and thought, if the king is guarding these plants with soldiers, they must be incredibly valuable. So they started stealing them, under cover of darkness, sneaking past the guards who pretended not to notice, planting the stolen potatoes in their own fields. Frederick's reverse psychology worked perfectly. Back in France, Parmentier was released from prison. He returned home with a mission: convince France that potatoes could save lives. In 1771, Parmentier won an essay contest. The judges voted potatoes as the best substitute for ordinary flour, but France didn't care. They didn't need a wheat substitute yet. Parmentier faced constant criticism. Other scientists mocked him. They called him the potato propagandist. Then 1785 arrived, famine year. The wheat harvest failed across northern France. People were starving. Bread prices shot up 500% in some regions. More than 300 riots erupted. They called it the Flour War. And in the north, where some farmers had secretly planted potatoes, those communities survived. Parmentier saw his chance, but he knew facts alone wouldn't work. He needed showmanship. He needed to make potatoes seem exclusive, desirable, elite. In 1787, King Louis XVI gave Parmentier 54 acres of land outside Paris. Parmentier planted it all with potatoes. Then he hired heavily armed soldiers to guard the fields. During the day, the guards marched back and forth, looking fierce, looking official. But at night, Parmentier sent the guards home. He left the fields completely unprotected. He wanted people to steal his potatoes, and they did. Poor families snuck into the fields under cover of darkness. They dug up potato plants, carried them home, planted them in their gardens. Soon, everyone wanted these mysterious vegetables that the rich man guarded with soldiers. But Parmentier didn't stop there. He threw lavish dinner parties. Every dish featured potatoes. He invited the most influential people in France: scientists, aristocrats, philosophers. Even Benjamin Franklin attended one when he was serving as ambassador to France. Parmentier wore potato flowers in his buttonhole everywhere he went. He convinced Marie Antoinette to wear potato flowers in her hair at a royal ball. When the Queen of France wears your vegetable as jewelry, people notice. Aristocratic women started copying her. King Louis XVI reportedly told Parmentier, "One day, France will thank you for having found the bread for the poor." In 1789, Parmentier published his masterwork, Treatise on the Culture and Use of the Potato, over 200 pages of detailed instructions. It was printed by order of the king, royal backing, Official approval. The timing was incredible, because 1789 was also the year the French Revolution began. As the monarchy fell, the potato rose. By 1794, potato cookbooks were being published. Within a generation, potatoes were accepted throughout France. But the potato story in Europe was about to take a dark turn. Potatoes had spread across Europe by the early 1800s. They'd become so successful that entire populations depended on them, especially in Ireland. By the 1840s, over 3 million Irish people relied completely on potatoes for food. Why? Because of economics and colonialism. Irish tenant farmers rented small plots of land from English landlords. The rent was crushing, and no crop produced more food per acre than potatoes. A family of 8 could survive on the potatoes grown on just 1 acre. The average Irish laborer consumed 12 to 14 pounds of potatoes every single day. Here's the problem no one saw coming. All these potatoes came from a very small number of original plants. There was almost no genetic diversity. The Irish grew mainly one variety. Every potato plant in Ireland was essentially a clone. The crop was vulnerable. 1845. Late summer. Farmers noticed something strange. The potato leaves were turning black, withering, dying. A fungal disease called potato blight had appeared. It spread across Europe like wildfire. The blight turned harvest-ready potatoes to black mush, both in the ground and in storage. About 1/3 of Ireland's potato crop was lost in 1845, but 1846 was catastrophic. 3/4 of the harvest was destroyed. Nearly the entire crop gone. People started dying that autumn, mostly the elderly, the very young, the already weak. But it got worse. The blight continued. 1847, 1848, 1849. Hunger continued year after year. The death toll was staggering. Over 1 million people died of starvation and disease. Another million emigrated, mostly to America. Ireland's population dropped by up to 25% in just a decade. Entire villages were abandoned. Here's what made it even worse. Large quantities of grain crops were being exported from Ireland during the famine. Food was leaving the country while people starved on the docks. The government refused to stop the exports. This wasn't just a natural disaster. It was an outrage. The potato blight caused 100,000 deaths outside Ireland, too. It influenced much of the unrest that led to the European revolutions of 1848. Entire governments fell, all because of a fungus that attacked a single crop. But here's something most people don't know. Potatoes can actually be poisonous, not because of some superstition, but because of a real chemical called solanine. When potatoes are exposed to light, they turn green. That green color means solanine has formed. In 1922, a serious epidemic broke out in Germany traced to high solanine content. In 1925, 7 members of a German family ate green potatoes. 2 of them died. So the medieval Europeans who feared potatoes, they weren't entirely wrong. They just didn't understand why potatoes could be dangerous. It wasn't witchcraft. It was chemistry. Fast forward to today. The potato is now the world's 4th largest food crop, after rice, wheat, and corn. Over 1 trillion potatoes are consumed every year. Billions of people eat potatoes every single day. But the potato's journey from poison to staple did more than just feed people. It changed the entire structure of modern agriculture. When Europeans adopted potatoes, they needed fertilizer to grow them at scale. They imported Peruvian guano. This became the world's first intensive fertilizer. The template for industrial farming was born. When the Colorado potato beetle attacked crops, farmers turned to the first artificial pesticide ever created, a form of arsenic. This was the beginning of chemical pest control. The potato, in other words, created what we now call the agro-industrial complex. Factory farming, chemical fertilizers, pesticides. All of it traces back to the potato. But there's an even bigger impact: Historian William H. McNeill argued that the potato led to empire. By feeding rapidly growing populations, potatoes permitted a handful of European nations to dominate most of the world between 1750 and 1950. Think about that. The potato fueled the rise of the West. European populations exploded because potatoes provided reliable, abundant food. Those larger populations needed resources. They expanded, colonized, conquered. Britain's population doubled between 1750 and 1850, all fed by potatoes. So let's answer the question we started with. Why did Europeans think potatoes were poison for 200 years? First, potatoes belong to the nightshade family. They really do resemble deadly nightshade. Europeans weren't being paranoid. They were making a logical connection based on limited information. Second, potatoes can be poisonous when improperly stored or when green. Green potatoes have killed people. The fear had a basis in reality. Third, potatoes were foreign. They came from a conquered land. They looked strange. Religious leaders declared them ungodly. Cultural bias reinforced the fear. Here's what's mind-blowing. It took theatrical marketing campaigns to overcome that fear. Frederick the Great's fake guards, Parmentier's dinner parties, and midnight thefts, Marie Antoinette's potato flowers. These weren't just clever tricks. They were early examples of psychological marketing. Make something seem exclusive, and people want it. These principles still drive marketing today. And here's the final revelation. The Incas knew the potato's value 10,000 years ago. They built civilizations on it. They measured time with it. But it took Europeans 200 years to learn what indigenous Americans already knew. Sometimes the most valuable knowledge is the hardest to accept when it comes from an unexpected source. The potato traveled from the Andes Mountains to prison cells, from royal gardens to revolutionary France, from feared poison to global staple. Its journey mirrors humanity's struggle between fear and progress. Which historical food should we explore next? Tomatoes, also once considered deadly. Chocolate, once reserved for royalty. Sugar, which sparked wars and slavery. Drop your vote in the comments below. And remember this. The next time you eat French fries or mashed potatoes, you're eating a food that kings guarded with armies, a food that was banned by law, a food that changed the course of empires, from devil's apples to dinner plates, from poison to delicacy. That's the power of the potato.